My guest is the Honorable Mr. Kitso, who's the Minister of Environment, Wildlife and Tourism for the Republic of Botswana. Sir, your delivery and presentation at the WTTC Summit yesterday touched on a lot of people. It seems like maybe you should describe briefly for our audience what makes the way that you're approaching the sustainable development in your country has touched on others as being so valid an approach.
Well, I think we come from a very humble beginning as a country. Our people are dependent on the very natural resources that we speak of, especially when I speak to issues of fauna and flora. And therefore, culturally, Botswana have always been people who have known how to conserve the natural resources. But since the commercialization of these very natural resources, we've seen a growth in the abuse, if I may use that word, because of commercialization, of people now wanting to harvest faster than they can reproduce themselves. And therefore, this is where the government stepped in to make sure that people understood that for its sustainability, when I say its sustainability, I'm talking about the natural resources, people must make sure they must conserve and live off them. Conserve and live off them, meaning that they should not harvest faster than they can reproduce. So we went into a program called Community-Based Natural Resource Management, where government allows communities to use the natural resources for their benefit. And because of that, communities have taken greater responsibility for the natural resources. They stop poaching, they ensure that there's no over-harvesting and issues like that. We need the big companies to come and invest and bring FDI, because obviously if we were to develop these lodges ourselves as a government or these concessions ourselves, it would take a longer time because we were a very poor country, and we are still a relatively poor country. That's one side of it. You get companies to come and invest in Botswana so they can hire Botswana, and out of necessity, FDI itself means it brings new technologies, new ways of doing things, and what you call forward linkages, where they employ Botswana, they improve their capacities. On the other side of it, the concessions we give to those companies that come from outside are not the same as we give to the locals themselves. The locals themselves have to operate in what we call wildlife management areas. They are also given the opportunity to choose if they want to bring in an investor to them for their own capacity building. So it's a sort of way of incubating them in developing their skills or the wherewithal within the tourism sector and understanding conservation. Because as you see, my ministry is called Environment, Wildlife and Tourism. And I say that sequence is important. Without environment, you don't have wildlife. Without wildlife and environment, you don't have tourism. When we got independence in 1966, the population of Botswana was a very agrarian population and strictly subsistence farming. It is moving them out of subsistence farming into these new things, tourism, game ranching, and all these things. This is new. What government did when it set aside 17% of the land space to game reserves and protected areas, it then developed what we call wildlife management areas, which are buffer zones around the game reserves or the protected areas. It is within these buffer zones where we have the highest conflict, i.e. where the people want to use them for agricultural purposes or where you have your human-wildlife conflict issues. It is within those buffer zones that we start to address the real issue of conservation, showing people that agriculture has its own place, tourism, conservation has its own place, and we are comparing the returns that come out of the two. And we are saying to them, going into the future, issues of global warming, whether agriculture is sustainable or not in future, I don't know, because obviously it doesn't rain when it used to rain. But now wildlife are more hardier than cattle. So let's choose what is best for us today. Obviously NGOs are a very important component to any development. Government in itself cannot have all the skills or all the manpower they require to cover their whole country. Therefore, what we do in my ministry with NGOs is we sit and show them, at least give them policy guidelines in terms of what we are trying to achieve with a particular policy. And then the relevant NGOs would come on board and offer us services, i.e. whether it's for capacity development in certain particular sectors of a society or communities, that's what they'll do. So we find that we have a healthy relationship with our NGOs.